Morning all. The England team in the Olympiad faced a very strong Cuban team. Michael Adams, rated 2722, was up against someone even slightly higher rated at 2725, Dominguez-Perez Leinier. So how did this game go? So this was on the 30th of August 2012, round 3, E4 from Michael Adams, and Dominguez played the Sicilian defence and Adams played knight f3, and after d6, not the open Sicilian but instead bishop b5 check, and he's playing it like a Ruy Lopez. It's very interesting. It's very simple to play in a way. After knight d7, c3, so it's a kind of Ruy Lopez type plan where the bishop might even go back like this, and white's content with just constructing a nice pawn centre. So after knight gf6, queen e2 here supporting that pawn, and the bishop comes back now after a6. It comes back in a Ruy Lopez fashion to c2 now. Although black's gaining space, this might be a target for a4 later, this b5. After bishop b7, castles, g6, and now this central construction with d4. So it does vary considerably from the nature of an open Sicilian. It looks more like a Ruy Lopez type position. After cd, cd, it's an ideal classical centre here, and black fianchettos here. So he's got both bishops fianchettoed, but is this e5 going to be dangerous, or d5 at some point? For the moment, knight c3 is played, and now not the routine castling from black, but instead rook c8, and it looks as though b4 might be useful for black at some point, especially with that rook glaring down. So precaution against that is played here, a3, which does rule out the possibilities for striking at the pawn with a4 later, or makes it more unlikely. After castles we see rook d1, and here the intention of e5 seems to be emphasized with rook d1, rook staring at the queen like this. Knight b6, but no, here actually bishop d3 is played, starting to put pressure on this pawn chain on the queen side. And again it seems now with bishop d3, with less pressure on the c file, after rook e8, now a4 is played. So these pawns have been kept intact in the centre, and really white's now focusing attention on this structure here, interestingly, and not minding in fact b4. The knight simply retreats. It's got some squares now. It can reroute from d2, it can go to b3, and then maybe to a5. So a5 is played, which is a potential target now after knight d2, because the knight coming to b3, a5 is going to be a bit vulnerable. After e6, knight b3, rook a8, and white's also got a bit more control over the light squares like b5 here. Bishop g5, okay, and it looks as though e5 could be nasty again here with this pin. Now the bishop's not evicted with h6, instead an unpinning with queen d7, which maybe ties down and tries to potentially win this pawn in some lines. Bishop f6, a forcing move, giving up the dark square bishop, and bishop b5 protecting a4, and also causing now bishop c6 to have to be played if black doesn't want to lose the exchange. Then we see e5 finally, a central strike. So this is quite nice, this kind of play on the queen side, springing play in the centre now. Bishop g7, e takes d6, and okay, there's a slightly risky isolated queen's pawn potentially, but on the other hand white's grip on c5 and e5 is evident here, and in fact that's made use of now. After queen takes d6, we see knight e5. So pressure on c6 here. What is the bishop going to do? It can't really go back on this diagonal without losing the exchange. Bishop e5 doesn't seem at all appetizing, unleashing the rook on the d file, weakening the dark squares. Black plays bishop takes b5, and we can see the positional battle seems to be going in white's favour now after queen takes b5. If we just look at this position, nice control over c5, potentially the c file, a5 vulnerable. This knight's very nice. White's got a very aggressive position from a very simple kind of system against the Sicilian, a bit Ruy Lopezian in nature. Knight d5, it looks like a nice blockade though, and black's offering this pawn. It looks too dangerous to take that pawn at the moment, but knight c6 seems to imply it's, ruling out any rook b8. So really, is this pawn actually on now? Black plays bishop h6, and the pawn is actually taken here with the c knight, not the a knight. And we see queen c7, and the knight returns back. And this passed a pawn, is it going to be significant? So that positional advantage has now netted concrete material, and still white's pieces look quite good here. Rook ec8, and the knight goes back to e5. Now bishop f4. Is black generating some counterplay here? Queen e2 supporting the knight, but what about c2? Isn't that an invasory point? Okay, black actually takes on e5 here, getting rid of that very useful knight. But okay, he's weakened his dark squares a bit, but he's got a nice knight on d5, and he uses that invasory point, queen c2. So is this really dangerous? Has black got sufficient counterplay here for the pawn? White takes and challenges, defends the second rank. Rook c4, and now g3. Okay, Adams is in constriction mode now, cutting out some possibilities like knight f4, making space for his king in that end game. g5. Now we see knight d4, and it looks again now that another eviction might take place with b3 here, potentially, and also that would allow rook a2 potentially, and this pawn might actually be really dangerous. All there's possibilities of knight b5, knight d6, various possibilities, and black goes a bit crazy now. It looks like a crazy looking move in this position. Black plays the surprising move, knight c3, sacrificing a knight to generate a huge pin. So white actually takes this and has to support the knight on d4. He plays rook d3, and we get this huge pin. But still, in this position, white at the moment, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's equal on pawns, but white's a knight up. Okay, Michael Adams plays rook ad1, and here we see that if black plays, say, c2, then maybe, knight takes c2 is just a comfortable rook and pawn ending here with the outside pass pawn. Even if, give back the knight, get the rook behind the pawn, it looks comfortable. Black didn't want to go in for that with c2. He played actually rook takes a4, and white is just now playing knight e2. It looks like a piece up. And this is towards move 40, so I guess black might have been short of time with this combination. It looks like a 40 combination from a difficult position. And it looks here that, c2, there's check, rook takes d8 check. What does black do here? He's a piece down. He plays rook takes d3, and he's a piece down. This pawn's not going anywhere, because white just plays rook c3 now. And the knight and rook are handling that c1 square. Rook e4, rook takes c2, piece up. Restraining black pawns shortly after rook d5 plays g4. I mean, this should be technique because it's only a pawn for the knight. So this is past move 40 now, and yeah, it looks as though black could resign this. He's just a piece down for not much, and in fact here, after knight b5, he does resign. So a great win for Michael Adams here against someone slightly higher rated. So a clash of the super GMs here in round 3. So England actually triumphed over a similarly, basically on the 4 boards triumphed. I'll put the result link for that match result, England versus Cuba, in the description of this video, so you can see on the official site what happened. So we had England, I say we because I'm in England, pardon the bias. England had 2 draws and 2 wins, and this is one of the key wins. Nigel Shaw also won in this match, so a very, very good result for England yesterday in round 3 of the Chess Olympiad, and this was part of it. Let's have a quick look at it again. So a nicely played positional Roy Lopesian type treatment of the Sicilian defence, where we see black doing the pincer kind of double fianchetto where you get the X-ray bishops potentially on across both colour complexes. But it looks as though A3 kind of gives the idea that A4 isn't on the cards, and that kind of misfoots Black. That, you know, maybe he thinks if A4 isn't on the cards, surely, you know, okay, it's not going to be played. It's still played, you know, just here now. Anyway, and it doesn't matter about the tempo gain on the knight because squares are being loosened here. These light squares are being loosened. Knights are good at coming back and redirecting and rerouting, and with A5 under pressure, but also more significantly perhaps this B5 control is highlighted, and this forcing combination bishop takes F6, giving up the dark square bishop to get something going here on this side of the board. It's very interesting. The pressure is intensified with this E5 break because the knight's been brought to E5 to put pressure on C6 again. So White is accepting that downside of a nice isolated queen's pawn for the intense pressure yielded here, and he's netting a pawn now, it seems. So this is a critical position where Black's now dropping a pawn and still trying to get some counterplay going. So giving up the dark square bishop, but the knight's very useful on b3 here for this rook d2. And this combination here, which is faulty. Now, if we just engine check this position, was it necessary? Was Black doing that badly here? White had a small advantage, well, almost a clear advantage. Almost. Well, less than a pawn anyway, advantage. Technically from Houdini 2.0's assessment. So knight e7 and rook a5, but knight c3 looks like the clear blunder of the game. Or is it? It looks as though that doesn't make things too much worse. So let's just check, was knight c3 one of the top candidates? It looks like a surprising move. It's not really mentioned. It's not one of the better moves from an engine point of view, but it looks like a bad position to be in. So really here, okay, rook d8, we see this sequence. It seems c2 was virtually forced in this position, but still White's a pawn up in that ending. So instead of the rook takes a4, this is where it goes above 2 because of knight e2, just like a piece up. And so engine recommendation is c2 here, but it looks as though, okay, it's good for White in the long run. That ending could be winnable with that outside pass pawn, because the king could come across to support the rook. If the rook's behind the pawn in that ending, that would have been dangerous. Let's see that again just quickly. This ending position here looks promising. If the rook's having to like defend, you know, maybe the king can just come up here. Whoops, pardon me. It looks as though this position is going to be good for White. So Dominguez, he refused that ending and he just went a piece down here in this critical position. So this was approaching move 40 though, so I guess he must have been in time pressure or something. Anyway, before, maybe even at the point of this combination to play this knight c3 here, he might have been in time pressure. So okay, let's go back. So a piece up, and it was fairly easy to consolidate here. The piece up, there wasn't too many issues. After knight b5, in fact, Black resigned. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, and I want to get into the spirit of this chess Olympiad, so I'll be covering some other games quite briefly. Please excuse the lack of intense analysis. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.